Deck building in Master Duel can be a lot of fun, but it can also be tough if you're looking to build a more competitive or well-rounded deck. This is going to be a guide on how to build a deck that works well and is consistent enough to enjoy. The first thing to note is that you'll want to decide the kind of deck you'll want to build. The main types of decks are combo decks, which, as the name states, runs a usually non-linear combo to get to an end board that tends to be stronger than most and usually has a good amount of negates and disruptions. Control decks, which focus more on keeping the duel at your pace and not giving the opponent a lot of wiggle room to maneuver around your field, usually done through tower boss monsters or back row. Or mid-range decks, which is like a little combination of both. A good example of this kind of deck is Branded, as it can set up both back row control as well as monster control through multiple combo lines. The sample deck I'm using is Voiceless Voice, which is a type of control deck. While Voiceless is a very expensive deck, it's very good at what it does, and is well worth it to some players, not to mention it's still in the shop. When it leaves the shop, it'll be more expensive since it won't have a secret pack. The first thing you'll want to look into with your deck of choice are the core engine cards. These are going to be your main starter cards and cards that will see the most use. Here Low is our main one-card starter, as she alone can get us to our optimal end board. When building your deck, you'll want to know which cards can start your plays by themselves, and which ones require others in the hand. Saphira is a great example, as she requires other cards like Low to be as useful. When it comes to your core cards, you'll want to note the ratios in which you play them. Cards that can start or add to your combo in a significant way should be played at 3 copies, like Low, Saphira, and the Barrier, as they all can get you to your end pieces. If you have boss monsters in the main deck, you'll likely only need to run 1 or 2 max, as they're usually not easily summoned, but are very good when on the field. You don't want to brick with your boss monster in hand if you don't need it. That being said, you'll also want to be mindful of the cards with less uses, like the Prayers. This is a card we only run 2 of, because it's only needed for 2 main effects. It's also what we call a garnet, meaning it needs to be in the deck to be useful at all. Unlike most garnets, the Prayers is useful in the hand if you have the Skull Guardian to summon with it. This is also the case for cards like Fusion Destiny. This is what the core of our sample deck is looking like. 3 of our most vital starters, 1 to 2 of our boss monsters, and 1 to 2 of our cards that assist them. You want to keep the ratio of your core cards tight, so you don't brick as much with your garnets, or cards that don't help you start your plays as well. I advise you look into some consistency cards. These are cards that can help you draw into your starters or extension, or they can hard search for specific types of cards depending on what you're playing. Pre-preparation of Rites is a great example of this, as it adds 2 cards to the hand. Cards like Pot of Extravagance, Desires, or Prosperity are all great in terms of draw power. Do note that they come with a downside specific to the card, an example being Pot of Extravagance must banish 6 random cards from your extra deck, face down. There are a plethora of cards like this in the game that can help a lot of different deck types. Do note, most of them are URs, but there are options that are cheaper, like Small World. With these, you'll want to pay attention to your ratios as well, as you shouldn't need too many. I like playing 3 to 4 at most, unless I'm building a 60-card deck. Before I get to the extra deck, I want to point out there are non-engine cards that can help extend your plays if you get disrupted. A deck like Tearlaments will run cards like Fairy Tale Snow, Fenrir, or the Horus package to help further their plays or extend off their main plays. This plays poorly into Max C, so be careful building this way. Most decks will have monsters in the extra deck that are used in the main plays. While this isn't the case for Voiceless, you'll always want to make the most use of your extra deck. Most decks usually don't play more than 1, sometimes 2 of any monster, as it takes up space. You'll want your archetypal monsters, and then if you have room, generic boss monsters are more than useful in almost any deck that can summon them. Baron, Apollo, Little Knight, and even Phantom of Yubel are very good and generic options that most decks play. When building your deck, this will also help you figure out how you want to set up your end board, as most decks end turns with extra deck monsters anyway. If you can consistently summon a decent generic monster with your combos, it may be worth adding. Next, you'll definitely want to add hand traps and or board breakers to your deck, or maybe both. The more you can run without knocking the consistency of your deck, the better effect they'll have, because they'll often be in your opening hand. Max C is by far the best and most used hand trap, Your deck should have ways to play around it, but if you don't like Max C, you should run 3 Ash Blossom. Called by the Grave and Crossout Designator are great answers to Max C, but not necessary in every deck. Also, if you have room in your extra deck, you might consider playing Super Poly as one of your board breakers. A well-timed Super Poly can win duels on its own, and the fusions can help you make other plays. With the core of the deck, hand traps and board breakers, plus consistency cards, this is what our deck is looking like. For your hand traps, you'll want to be particular about which you use. Ghost Bell, for example, I'm playing because Voiceless is weak to Called by the Grave, as well as Bestials. Knowing what your deck is good against but also weak against will help you choose which non-engine cards are best for your preference. If your deck is weaker to Max C, you'll want to have plays under minimal special summoning, but can hold its own during the next turn. This can be through IP and Little Knight, for example. After building your deck, you should definitely test it out in the solo mode to learn your basic combo lines. This will also be a way to see if your deck bricks a lot, and let you know if you need to change anything. You can also play in casual mode, so you can practice your plays against disruptions as well. If your deck does brick sometimes, you might want to add in more consistency cards or less hand traps. Alternatively, you can simply run more than 40 cards. Some top decks run between 42 and 45 cards. I personally don't like this, as my luck needs me to have the best chance at opening my starters and hand traps. My ratios are good for me, but you'll want to test how your deck feels so you know for yourself if it's good enough. The important thing is for the deck to be playable enough so you can enjoy it. The more you know your deck, the easier it will be to play. You'll also learn ways to unbrick your hand, depending on what you're playing. As a little side note, a lot of people play decks that are hybrids of multiple archetypes, or engines. Examples of this are Tearlaments, Centurion, or the Bestial and Horus engines. These smaller engines can be useful in extending your plays, or simply getting them started. Most decks like these are more susceptible to Max C. While Max C is dangerous, playing a deck like that can be a lot of fun, as you can make top-notch end boards if gone uninterrupted. Occasionally, you could also deck out your opponent with something like card destruction. There are plenty of decks online too that you can take inspiration from or copy outright. Take deck building with a grain of salt, as nobody's deck is going to be perfect to everyone. Build to enjoy the game, and understand that no matter how great a deck is, it's only as good as its pilot. You can play any deck and do really well with it. Let me know in the comments what questions you guys might have, and what decks you guys plan on building for the next season. I'm waiting for Ritual Beast to come to the game, definitely saving my gems for that. Other than that, I'll see you guys in the next video.